Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Antinatalism Around the World. My name's John. I've been on the channel a couple of times before. Today, for the UK, I wanted to speak with one of the most knowledgeable, intelligent, articulate, and handsome antinatalists out there. But that's enough about me. So I've got Lawrence to speak with.
I was thinking, what is this? A dating profile?
Flat
Mugged
yourself.
me off there.
So yeah, we're just going to chat about what antinatalism is like in the UK. I'll mostly be asking the questions because Lawrence, you are a lot more knowledgeable on this subject than I am. But we are both UK-based antinatalists, so I'll interject every now and then, if that's all right.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, it'll be a bit of a back and forth. It was actually I've done, I think, 5 or 6 of these now. Of all around the world. And I was thinking I haven't actually done one for my own country yet. So then I messaged you and I was like, oh, do you want to I was initially thinking, oh, I'll get John on. And then I was thinking, well, actually, it'd be quite fun to do a reverse because I always interview the other person. So then I was like, oh, well, actually, maybe John can interview me, but we'll discuss that. I mean, I'm the one that's done the research, so I've got all of the fucking facts and shit.
Definitely.
But
I'm just here for my good looks. Lawrence is
yeah.
very knowledgeable.
Yeah, so with your good looks and your smarts, maybe we'll get through this.
Sounds good.
Anyway.
So, first question we've got here. How did you become an antinatalist?
Well, yeah, so I'm going to do this briefly because I always ask people this at the start. But obviously most of the people watching this will already know because I've talked about it on the channel before. And maybe you can briefly go over how you became one as well. But mine was actually, I mean, it's a bit ironic because I'm from the UK. This is about antinatalism in the UK. But I actually became antinatalist in Sweden. So mine was, I was at an animal rights demonstration. I can't remember exactly what we were demonstrating. It was probably the milk industry. Thinking about the stuff I was doing at the time, it was probably something against the dairy industry. And afterwards, we were on our way to I think it was like an all vegan supermarket or some sort of vegan restaurant, or there's an all vegan supermarket shop type place in Stockholm. And I just overheard a guy talk about antinatalism. And initially, I was sort of just baffled by it. I was really confused. Why would someone believe that? And the person I was speaking to said, he's an antinatalist. So I'd heard the word, but I never actually got to talk to the guy on that day. And then, a couple months later, or something, or maybe a month later, something like that, I was in the UK, visiting for one of the holidays or whatever. And again, I was at an animal rights demonstration, and then I spoke to a few of the activists there who happened to be anti-natalist. I can't remember how the topic came up. I think from piecing together the memories with myself and with other people, I think it was George Martin, Carnism Debunked, who was organizing the London Anonymous for the Voiceless chapter at the time. I think he must have brought it up. And then I was speaking about it with a couple of people, and I just, I was just asking questions because I was curious, and I just had nothing to say against what they were saying. They knocked down every sort of, curious argument I put up, oh, what about this? What about that? And then they told me, they sent me home with a few links to David Benatar interviews, and ever since then, it just made sense to me, and I couldn't think of any good arguments against it. So, yeah.
You really wanted to be a dad as well, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, to an extent, it's still something that appeals to me. I've got to say, not as much. It doesn't appeal to me as much anymore, but it still is something that appeals to me. But obviously, if I did that, it would either be, an adopted child or a child that my partner already has, or something like that.
Yeah, makes sense. I think the overlap with veganism, animal rights, and antinatalism definitely played a role for me as well. Back when Cosmic Skeptic was vegan, I watched some of his YouTube videos, and I mentioned this actually on one of the one of the interviews we did, the effective altruism and impactful activism interviews that we did on your channel, about how I saw the David Benatar interview on Cosmic Skeptics channel. But I think it's really interesting. Like, I heard all the rational arguments, and the rational
Mm.
arguments were starting to click. But around that same sort of time, my uncle died of cancer.
Yeah.
He had pancreatic cancer that had already spread by the time that they discovered it. So, unfortunately, didn't have any chance. And it
Yeah.
really just kind of like crystallized the arguments in my head about the risk that, this is like a normal everyday
Mm.
occurrence, sadly. Like, I've lived a very blessed and privileged life, but these kind of instances, I'm not even sure if tragedy is the right word, because you're taking that risk when you bring someone into the world that this kind of thing
Yeah.
can happen. So it was a combination of the intellectual arguments and then something happened in my own life that helped it bring
Mm.
it home for me on that
Yeah. Well,
emotion.
yeah, it would be a tragedy if it wasn't so common, because
Yeah.
like, and actually, it's weird. I didn't mention this before, and I'm actually not sure if I've mentioned it like publicly before. I might have somewhere. I can't remember, but like, actually, no, I have mentioned it before, but the reason I was actually in Sweden in the first place, I won't tell the whole story, but basically it started with my granddad being diagnosed with cancer.
Mm,
His was cancer of the liver. um and then, through a chain of events, I ended up in Sweden, basically as a result of that.
mm,
um but that, like, him getting cancer and then eventually dying from it was like probably the first really um like bad thing, that, bad experience, like significant, like, obviously I'd had bad experiences, but like significantly bad experiences that sort of, really shakes you up.
yeah.
um and that I mean, one, that just started a series of events that then, put me in a situation where I learnt about and then became antinatalist. But also, I think the experience also probably contributed, because I now understood more about when I was talking about antinatalism with these people. When they spoke about suffering, it wasn't, this abstract thing. It was
Yeah.
like I could reference a significant period in my life where I was like, oh, okay, I see what significant, suffering is.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not something that you think about or
Mm.
parents consider when they're thinking of bringing a child into the world.
Yeah.
Is, their child one day at whatever age being diagnosed with something. And again, it's an everyday occurrence. It's
Mm.
not something that we should, I mean, rationally, there's arguably we shouldn't be surprised about, but it still obviously very impactful. And
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
definitely
So
crystallized logical arguments for.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So should we hit up antinatalism in the UK then?
Yes, I was going to say, like, you're talking about discussing antinatalism and chatting
Mm.
around it with people. What's it like talking about antinatalism in the UK?
So, talking about antinatalism in the UK, I would say, like, obviously, it depends on your situation. People are in different situations, like, but that goes for every country. But like, by and large, I would say it is relatively easy to talk about in the UK. I
Mm,
think we're in a pretty fortunate situation. Um,
yeah,
like, yeah, don't get me wrong, like, if you talk about it, like, the vast majority of people are going to think you're a freak. um but like, we don't have, a strong religious culture or something. You're not going to get arrested, you're not going to get like beaten in the street or anything. We've got a relatively open culture here when it comes to ideas, at least at the moment anyway.
yeah,
But like, relatively speaking, if you can compare it to the rest of the world, the UK is in a like a very good situation. um and yeah, it's situational. Obviously, you wouldn't, like, don't bring it up at work. It's probably not the best thing. Like, it may burn bridges with friends and family. You know, but by and large, it's decent. So, like specific places where antinatalism is discussed in the UK, I would say it's like very very openly and commonly discussed in animal rights circles. I
Definitely.
would say I would say there are two key circles, two key sort of areas of UK society where antinatalism is discussed, right? The one I have the most experience with is animal rights circles. Basically any animal rights activist in the UK at some point has come into contact with antinatalism. They may not have an informed opinion, but they would have heard someone talk about it. It's
Yeah.
it's it's very commonly discussed. Um, like a lot of like I would say um every, and this will get on to the question when we talk about prevalence, but I would say every animal rights like related event that I have been to since becoming antinatalist, I've also known another antinatalist at the same event. There's at least
Yeah.
one. That's like how openly discussed and how common it is in animal rights circles in the UK. Um, the other circle that I would say I have less experience with. I know it's discussed in these circles, but I have less experience with it, so I don't know like how common or openly discussed it is. Although I would presume it's relatively openly discussed, just maybe not super common. Is academic circles as well. So obviously the
Yeah.
UK is very known for its universities, Cambridge, Oxford, etc. Um, like UCL, LSE, Imperial. The academic environment in the UK, again, relatively speaking, like relative to the rest of the world, is very open. You're not like well, I mean, again, this is not a circle I move in anymore. I mean, I went to university, but I got out there as basically as soon as I could. Um, but yeah, it seems like UK academics or academia, um, it's relatively commonly discussed as as well in there.
Yeah, I definitely
Um,
agree. I think
yeah,
another community as well is like the environmental kind of community, and I think there's an
yeah,
overlap between like as you talked about academia and animal rights. I think like
yeah.
environmentalists talk
Yeah,
about, or at least not having children rather than necessarily
I
being
would say
something like
probably more child free because I
yeah,
think in in environmental circles, I think people are probably more hesitant just because, and we'll get onto this with population matters later, but I
yeah.
think people are probably more hesitant because you get accusations of like eco-fascism and stuff like that. You get what I
No,
mean?
that's true. That's true.
So whereas you don't really in animal rights circles, it's like you like the if you're an antinatalist, people don't instantly label you with something.
Yeah,
It's yeah.
that's true.
If anything, in animal rights circles, because most people in animal rights and most vegans are used to being on the fringe of society in terms of some ethical belief they have. Usually, even if they don't agree, they're relatively sympathetic to or or should I say empathetic to you as someone who
Definitely.
holds another belief, that's on the sort of edge of society that you have out of concern for the suffering that others are going through.
I think that's the key
Um,
point about it being like a suffering focused belief. I think a lot of vegans, even if they're not antinatalists, they can relate to the idea of not wanting to bring someone into existence to
yeah,
cause them to suffer because ultimately that's the standard that we have for farmed animals and factory farmed
yeah,
animals. We don't want those to come into existence.
yeah,
The suffering they'll face. So I think they can make that connection, even if they don't think that they want to apply it to people. I was going to say, like my general, there's like a weird pattern I've recognised when I tell people that I don't want to have children, and
mm,
that is that, as you're saying before, like we're quite lucky in the UK that you can quite openly talk about antinatalism and certainly not having children. And
mm,
saying you don't want to have children is actually pretty socially acceptable in
yeah,
large swathes of the UK. Obviously, there are like religious communities and different kind of like more culturally conservative communities in the UK as well. It's quite a diverse place, but I guess compared to a lot of places, it is acceptable to say you don't have children.
mm,
Um, if you say you don't want to have children because you don't like kids because they like smell or are annoying or they cost a lot, like people are totally understanding of that, especially parents who've had kids. Um, I find that they're totally understanding. Like, oh yeah, no, I get it. Like, if you don't like kids, you don't want to have them, that kind
mm,
of thing. But when you say you don't want to have kids because you don't want your kids to suffer, then people get so offended
Yeah, yeah,
by that. It's like, yeah, if I hate kids, if I say, oh, kids are smelly and they can be expensive, even parents will say, yeah, it's hard raising kids. But when I say I don't want to have kids because I don't want to cause their suffering and death, then the defensiveness comes out.
yeah, yeah,
And it's
yeah,
because parents don't want to acknowledge that or entertain the idea that they are responsible for the inevitable suffering and death
yeah, yeah.
of their
But it,
children.
yeah,
Which is
but
general
even
child hatred is like more acceptable than concern for them.
yeah, but for people watching in other countries, like even then, even if people would get defensive, like they would with any sort of, you know, thing that they would maybe see as like a threat to their ethics, like even then, most people like they wouldn't berate you or anything.
Yeah,
Like
no, it's pretty mild,
we have sort of very comfortable lives as antinatalists in the UK,
definitely.
relatively speaking. By and large, but again, it does depend on your situation. The other thing I would say now, obviously, this may change in the future, but I think um, at the moment and in the sort of recent history of the UK, we have a culture that is quite open to ideas, and a lot of people are quite curious. So I think, and this obviously is more. It's stronger of it's a stronger element of the culture in some places than it is in others. So it's more common in universities, obviously. So like I haven't done this, although I plan to at some point, but I would place a bet that if you put on a lecture at a university about the ethics of procreation or something, but you phrased it in a way so it wasn't super academic, the average person would understand what the talk is about and stuff. I think that would be probably like relatively well attended because people are generally quite curious, um, and they like to hear what they would perceive as strange or uncommon viewpoints and ideas. So I think that's also something worth noting about British culture as well. And we even have some people may have heard of it because I think it's quite like internationally famous. And I think this is actually something relatively unique about the UK. There may be other places in the world that have a similar place, um, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. I might just be being ignorant. But we have this place called Speaker's Corner, which is it's so in London, which is the capital, we have a park that's pretty much bang in the center of London called Hyde Park. It's one of the famous parks in London. And on the northeast corner of Hyde Park, there's a place called Speaker's Corner. And it's famous, I think, around the world for being a place where um, you specifically go. It's specifically designated for people to go there and argue different ideas, especially controversial ideas as well. So you can go there. They traditionally it's on a Sunday. I don't know if it just happens every day now. I'm pretty sure I've been there when it hasn't been a Sunday and there have been people debating. But if you go
Sunday's
there on a
definitely the main
Sunday,
day. That's definitely the big.
yeah, yeah.
Day.
So if you go there on a Sunday, you will see loads of people there debating each other on a whole range of different topics. Um, and occasionally, vegans go there. At the moment, from what I've seen when I've been there, it's dominated a lot by religious people at the moment,
Yeah,
especially Muslims.
you be careful when you go down there. That the Dower team will be quite can potentially be quite confrontational as well. Without
Yeah,
being too
yeah.
controversial or stereotype, but there have been instances, especially if you want to criticize Islam. If you were there, a Christian preacher was stabbed in the face about a
Oh,
year
really?
at Speaker's Corner. Yes,
Oh,
that's
I didn't know that.
so when people are debating religion, particularly Islam, it can be a bit heated. So what I will
Mm.
say that it should really be called Shouters Corner because it does get quite heated there. And there's a lot of clips on YouTube to show
Yeah.
it. So it's not for the faint-hearted, but
Yeah, yeah.
it
Like
can be a
if
lot
you
of
go
fun.
there, yeah, like if you I didn't know about that violent thing that happened.
Yeah.
That's actually quite sad that, in the place that's supposed to be about ideas, people take it physical. But I'll be honest, I'm not surprised that it comes from a certain religion, or just religious person generally. But anyway, um So yeah, at Speaker's Corner, the general setup is like you can literally just be anyone. It doesn't matter who you are, and you can just walk down there. Um, with people generally take like either a chair to stand on or like a stool, or and they usually bring a sign as well, so they can write something simple on the sign to get people's attention. But then they're also talking, so that people come over. So you'll often, if you go to Speaker's Corner, see people standing on a chair essentially like proselytizing a given message
Yeah.
to the crowd, and a circle will form around them, and it's usually quite interactive as well, so people will shout objections or questions at the person. And getting back to antinatalism, there have been antinatalists go there and debate antinatalism. One of the famous antinatalists who frequents Speaker's Corner, that I'm sure everyone will know, is Danny Shine.
Yeah.
So I won't speak too much about Danny now because I'm going to mention him again later, where I'll go into more about like who he is and what he does. But basically, for the sake of this bit, Danny is an antinatalist, has been for a few years. I think I can't remember exactly how long. I've had him on the channel before to talk about being a parent as an antinatalist. So definitely go and check that out. I'll link it in the description. But he regularly goes to Speaker's Corner. And in the past couple of years, antinatalism has been one of the common things that he always talks about. So there are so many videos of him talking about it, but we can get into it a bit later because we'll talk about sort of notable figures from around the UK. The only other thing that I would mention about what it's like discussing antinatalism in the UK is that there has been antinatalist discussion on what you could maybe call like UK YouTube as well.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure you can really divide YouTube up into countries, really. It's more divided up in by languages, right? So maybe you can't really call it UK YouTube, but there were two UK YouTubers. The first one we've already mentioned, Cosmic Skeptic, and the other one is Humane Hancock. And they did a collaboration where they did two videos together. One was about wild animal suffering, which was uploaded on, I think I think that one was uploaded on Humane Hancock's channel, and then they did a discussion on antinatalism as well, and that was uploaded on Cosmic Skeptic's channel. And I believe neither of them are antinatalists. I would probably, my guess, just from seeing them, is they're both probably more sympathetic to antinatalism than the average person.
Definitely. I think even
But
Cosmic Skeptic said he'd press the big red button if he could. The
I really,
benevolent
yeah,
world exploder.
yeah. So, but I don't think either of them are sort of like a fully like signed up. I
No,
mean,
not a card
maybe
carrying
they've,
anti-natal.
yeah, maybe they've changed their views since I've, last either spoken to either of them or seen them comment on it publicly. But yeah. Should we move on to like
Well,
prevalence of
yeah, I was going
antinatalism
to
in the
say,
UK? We can probably,
we've touched on it a bit before, but like the
yeah,
prevalence and type of antinatalism in the UK.
yeah. So yeah, we can kind of, this kind of links to the last question about discussing it from what we've said already, but I can quickly whiz through like a few key things that I think are important to speak about. So the first thing is that like obviously, like everywhere else, antinatalism is a very rare viewpoint in the UK when you're talking about just how many people hold it. But relative to other countries, obviously I'm not in other countries. So actually let me say this for the whole thing. Obviously, when I compare the UK to the rest of the world, my comparison is going to be biased because it's like I'm much more exposed to the UK
Yeah,
examples and I'm
totally.
ignorant about what happens in other countries, right? But also when I'm speaking about anti-latalism in the UK, like I did research before this episode, but like again my answers are going to be biased from the research that I happen to do, the circles I move in, um and all of that sort of stuff. So that's going to apply to all my answers. But yeah, I think relatively speaking, antinatalism is probably pretty common in the UK, I would say, compared to other countries.
Yeah.
um yeah, so, and again, I'm not sure why that is. Maybe that's a function of our culture, just
Yeah.
because controversial ideas are can be more openly discussed, or maybe it's just sort of like just some random thing happened at some point and it just so happened to have a disproportionate impact on the UK. I'm not sure. Um,
Yeah, I think probably a mix of different factors. I think, as I said, we're
mm,
very, very lucky to have a reasonably tolerant and open society in terms
yeah,
of controversial ideas. Overlaps with veganism, strong university culture,
yeah.
quite a few different things overlapping, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In terms of the type of antinatalism that's present in the UK, again, this is going to be biased from the circles I move in, but I think it's pretty safe to say that the most common type of antinatalism is like sentiocentric antinatalism, or other people call it like vegan antinatalism, or vegantinatalism or whatever. But
It's always
basically,
harder to pronounce than it should be. Well, I'll
yeah, I know,
struggle with
yeah.
it. Yeah.
But basically the most common type of antinatalism is found in animal rights circles. It's vegans that are also antinatalist. I would actually say that it's actually probably like surprisingly common. Just whenever you go to an antinatalist event, sorry, an animal rights event, there's always going to be at least one antinatalist there, even if it's a relatively small event. One thing that I do notice is that I would say most of the antinatalists in the UK, because they move in animal rights circles, they actually they tend not to speak about antinatalism that much, even though they are an antinatalist. Um, they tend to focus their efforts on veganism or animal rights, advocacy or whatever. So if someone was visiting, they may get the impression that antinatalists aren't, that relatively abundant, but I would actually say they are. Just most of them focus their time and effort talking about animal rights instead. Um, and I know, many vegan antinatalists who are like that. I just know that they're antinatalist as well because I speak to them and I have that in common with them. Um, the only other things I would say about prevalence is that well, one actually first thing to mention, you were talking about strong university culture, is actually, if people don't know, the antinatalist book "Better Never to Have Been" by David Benatar was published by a UK publisher, Oxford University Press. So that's another thing to mention as well about antinatalism in UK academia, and it being sort of like this, us being the culture being sort of generally open to discussing controversial ideas. Um, yeah, and the only final other thing I'd say is that there are groups of antinatalists that connect in the UK and interact with each other and even meet up in person. So there's even a London antinatalist meetup group that occasionally meet up. I mean, the meetups aren't always massive, don't get me wrong. Um, but yeah, it's sort of like some semi-regular here and there occurrence of antinatalists meeting up. Um, but yeah.
Great. Yeah. Nothing more to add to that. Sorry. Okay. I think you froze for a bit, and then I wasn't
talk,
sure.
talk, yeah, talk about a smooth transition.
Thanks. I actually, believe it or not, I actually do a lot of interviews at work for my job.
Oh, really?
But yeah, there's always we're always told to like pause at the end in case anyone wants to add anything, but it doesn't make for a very free flowing conversation.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, given that you'd be the only person who would add anything, so you're just pausing for yourself.
that's true. That's true. What have we got next? So talk about antinatalism with friends and family.
Yeah,
Um,
so actually, well, maybe we've already spoken a bit about discussing antinatalism generally in the UK, but maybe we could speak about our personal experiences a bit quickly.
yeah, I don't know whether
Do you want to
this
go?
is. Yeah, I'm not sure whether this is due to. Like, I think it depends on fact. Like with families in particular,
Yeah, yeah.
I think it really depends.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah.
Um, I tell you, I'm hesitant. I'm now 28, and I'm hesitant to discuss antinatalism with. I'm at the age where a lot of friends are having kids or planning on having kids. Um,
Yeah.
And again, when I say that I don't have children, no negative pushback, anything like that. But if you say you don't have children because you want to protect the kids, then you can get a bit of negative pushback.
Yeah.
Again, nothing dramatic,
Yeah.
not going to get kicked out of my family or anything like that.
Mm.
But I guess it's tricky. It's tricky. Again, by tricky, I mean probably easier than anywhere else
Yeah. Yeah.
in the world.
You're not going to get disowned or beheaded.
No, absolutely, yeah.
Unless it goes really wrong.
Yes, I think honestly, it's probably more difficult to talk about antinatalism than veganism. I
Yeah. 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 I would say so.
I think it's even with people who don't plan on having children, um, because with veganism, you don't tend to get people leap to the defense of eating animals if people don't eat animals themselves.
Mm.
Yeah, even my friends who don't want to have kids think that my antinatalist beliefs are a bit extreme or something like that.
Mm.
So it's interesting. I think it's maybe because um, people tie the idea of not having kids with, or thinking it was a bad thing to come into existence with being very miserable and depressed and
Yeah.
um, even like suicidality. Like it's a hard belief sometimes for people to understand. Like if you think it was a bad idea to come into existence, why wouldn't you instantly just take yourself out of it?
Yeah.
But again, I don't know how. I can't imagine that any of this is specifically tied to being in the UK. If anything, it's probably still easier to talk about it here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean, this is just literally about our own personal experiences,
Yeah,
and like our experiences could be completely in sort of contradiction to the wider culture. Like that's completely fine. Like my experience has been okay. I kind of was ready to navigate it because I'd already navigated the same sort of thing with veganism. You know, talking about it with friends and family, um, and I all of the bridges that I was going to burn, I burnt them with veganism.
yeah,
So all the remaining bridges, like I kind of knew how to navigate once I, then became antinatalist, and it sort of came up with a few, um, people, but generally it's just not something I really discuss that much. Like this may be surprising to people, but it's just generally not really something I discuss that much in my personal life with,
same
unless
thing. Yeah,
yeah, unless I'm with unless I'm in a circle of vegans, because they would understand, having a sort of fringe view, or if I'm with other people who are antinatalist or sympathetic to it, then then it's like whatever. But when I'm just day to day, friends or family or whatever, um, never really comes up. Um, and the conversations I have been mixed, but it's usually just sort of like, I don't want to poke the bear and whatever. So I just sort of let it be. If it comes up, I actually usually generally just like say a small bit and then close the conversation down because I know it's not going to go well with friends and family. So I just think, what's the point?
no,
Um,
definitely. I think with vegans as well. Um, Obviously, they're more open to the idea. Um, and I think a lot of vegans have humility in the sense of acknowledging that they have changed their mind about it. They didn't
yeah,
have everything figured out, that they are capable of doing
yeah,
harmful things with, they're not tied to this idea of I am a good person and I will never do
yeah,
wrong. Because if they thought that, then they wouldn't have gone vegan. So I
yeah,
think
yeah.
just generally, it's just way easier to talk about vegans to this. Sorry, talk to vegans about this.
About this, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Another uh, key argument that I've started making when talking to vegans is that, and I've seen it happen quite a lot, is where vegans will have children, especially older animal activists. Vegans will have children and raise them vegan, and then their children aren't vegan
Mm,
and when they grow up. And obviously, we're talking about raising kids vegan a long time ago in the 80s or 90s. That's compared to now, it'll be a lot easier to raise a kid vegan now, I imagine.
mm,
But you just don't know. Um, and you know, I don't know what my great granddad's or any of my great grandparents' names were, let alone what they thought on ethical issues.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think a lot of vegans get the idea of, okay, you can have a kid and you can tell them all you want about veganism, but you don't know if they're going to be vegan. You don't know if your grandkids are going to be vegan, and you don't know if your grandkids,
Mm,
grandkids, grandkids are going to be vegan,
yeah.
because kids are influenced by all kind of influences and not just their parents' morals.
Mm.
I was brought up a Christian meat eater in a family with 4 kids, and I'm now a godforsaken atheist, vegan, antinatalist. So you can't mold your kids. You can't put expectations on them.
What a character arc.
I know. I know. Those three things do overlap. I tend to find vegans,
Yeah,
atheists, and
yeah.
antinatalists.
Yeah. I think that if there is a triad, it's gonna be people in like that's gonna be a triad.
Our Lord and Savior David Benatar is all three.
Yeah.
Next question: are there any political trends, movements, or laws that are relevant to procreation or antinatalism? I think we've talked a lot
So
about free expression in that, so
yeah.
focus on some other kind of trends.
Yeah, so this one was, I would say, there were two questions that I found like the most interesting to research about before doing this, and this was one of them. The other one we'll get to later, but this one was really interesting. So the okay, so I will start by talking about general trends, and then I'll get on to two specific organizations that are relevant to politics that I either knew about before or found out about. So, general trends. So, in terms of politics, there are not any current bills or laws in the making that I'm aware of, or that have been debated about recently that are really relevant to procreation that much. I mean,
Oh, I can think of.
the yeah, I mean, the closest we've got is like the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who, for anyone outside the UK, that's basically the person in the government who is at the top of the Treasury, who decides like where the money goes to what departments.
Yeah, and in
The
another jurisdiction, it'd be called like a finance minister or something like
Yeah,
that. Like,
yeah, someone like
yeah, the head of the economy,
yeah,
insofar as they're
yeah.
in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. It's a weird I mean, I know the UK isn't strictly like a capitalist country because there's no like true capitalist country, but it's weird to have like a country that's considered capitalist that has a head of the economy.
Yes.
Because obviously that would imply that it was like centrally planned, but anyway, so what was I talking about? So anyway, yeah. So one like small example is today the chancellor of the Exchequer released a budget, which basically is talking about like what government spending is going to be like in the next whatever period. And today, um, he spoke about increasing the amount of free childcare for parents, right? To It was increasing it from one amount to another. I can't remember the details of what it was, but like that's the closest thing to like an active political thing that's going on at the moment
Mm,
relevant to procreation. So it's not really massive, to be honest.
yeah.
Um,
I was going to say, and this is coming
but
in the context. Sorry, we've had a right wing government. Well, I say
yeah,
right wing. They're not massively like.
yeah,
Mm,
milk toast conservatives, basically. Like,
yeah, but very fiscally conservative for the past like 13 years or so. They've been in power, and actually a few things around like raising kids have been, and like government support for raising children have been rolled back in that time. So this additional support, it's not by any means like revolutionary compared to what we
mm,
had before. It may even be less than we had before under a more left wing government.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, it's not a huge like political huge story in the UK. Isn't like a big
yeah.
bombshell kind of story.
Yeah. But there are two so there are two more sort of loose social trends that I think are relevant to politics and procreation. So the first one is in the UK, we're one of the countries that's considered to have like an aging population.
Yeah.
So there is I've noticed in the past couple of years there's an increasing discourse, and I assume this will continue. There's an increasing discourse around supporting families, parenthood, you know, that sort of give it generally. And I'm assuming this sort of, even though it's not a massive thing, this budget that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, um, like announced today, I think that sort of is following along with that trend, right? So
Yes.
that's one trend that I think is relevant. The other one is immigration. So
Yes. The two are definitely related.
immigration, sorry.
I was going to say the two are definitely related.
Yeah, the two, yeah, and the two are related as well. But the other trend is immigration. So, immigration. I'm sure this is the same in a lot of countries, but immigration is like this big, topic in the UK, and it's being very hotly debated at the moment for a specific reason. But we don't need to get onto that specific reason. It's not related to this. But the general trend that we have in the UK is that we have my understanding, even though I'm not an expert on immigration globally, but we have a relatively high level of immigration compared to our population. And uh, the immigrant communities tend to be more religious and
Yes.
more socially conservative than the indigenous population. Um, so that I think is going to be a trend that as we see immigration continue to be a strong force in the UK, if it does, like obviously the political winds could change, but if immigration continues to be a relatively strong force in the UK and the indigenous population has a relatively low birth rate, we will tend to see immigrant communities have more political force. And so, the political dynamics in the UK will probably become more religious and more socially conservative, which would generally mean more pro natalist as well.
Yeah.
So, that's another thing to mention. Again, both of those are kind of sort of like loose and airy fairy, but they are general social trends that we're seeing in the UK. And I do think for the long term trajectory of the UK and birth rates and procreation, I think those two things will be relevant. But
Definitely.
anyway, did you have anything to say on that before I go on some specific things?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this trend is quite common in places in Northern Europe, and it's
Mm,
resulted in Northern European countries trying to incentivize people to have children um, because of the low birth rates.
yeah.
Uh, from what I've seen, I know that Denmark made some attempts to incentivize like higher birth rates. It didn't result in large spikes in
Yeah.
birth rates, but it is an interesting tension where immigration is a very hotly debated topic, and some people are very, very passionate about
Mm,
lowering the amount of immigration. But as the country gets older, fewer people are taking up jobs and forming a part of the workforce. Immigration is only going to increase.
mm,
Um, and interestingly, it tends to be the more conservative elements of our society that don't like immigration. But as you were saying, like the net result of immigration is likely that the country is going to become quite a bit more conservative,
mm,
which for me personally is another incentive not to have children,
yeah.
um, because of the way that like social attitudes might trend, um,
Mm.
yeah, over the coming years and decades.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the two specific things that I pulled up about things that are relevant to politics in the UK about antinatalism. So one of them is present and one of them is past. So the past one is quite interesting. And actually, I had not heard about this before I started researching for this episode. Someone like I'm in contact with, and they watch my videos and stuff. I won't mention who they are just in case they don't want me to. But they sent me a link to. There was actually in 2015, 2016 an antinatalist political party in the UK, which I was not aware of. But like when I say antinatalist, I mean proper antinatalist, not not fucking around with some sort of milk toast shit. Um,
I had
and
a picture of David Benatar as their political opponent.
exactly. So it's just a blank, like picture of just blank space. um, yeah, it was really interesting. So they were called the Antinatalist Party. They were set up in the UK in 2015, and they released a manifesto which I'm not going to bother like putting in the video because it's a PDF you can scroll through. So I'll link it in the description so anyone can have a look through it. But they were set up, I believe, in 2015, and they released a manifesto in 2016. And some of the key policies that they had um, were so actually before I go through some of their policies, one thing to note, just for anyone that isn't particularly like interested in politics, or maybe this just doesn't happen in other countries, but in the UK it's relatively common for small groups of people to start up political parties that surround a single issue. They're called
Yes.
single issue parties, and it's relatively common for them to pop up because what these people do is they essentially um, they are small groups of people with a outside of the mainstream belief that they want to raise awareness about. Like these people who set up these parties are fully aware they're not going to get into power. They do it because it's like a media stunt. It's like a political stunt,
Yeah.
so that they can get media coverage. Or some of them do actually get to a point where they do become popular enough
Yeah.
to
UKIP.
influence policy um, on a government level. So the best example is UKIP. So UKIP stands for the UK Independence Party, and I don't know if it was set up by Nigel Farage, but he was like the most famous figurehead of it. And basically, the one thing UKIP wanted to do was get the UK out of the European Union, and UKIP became like very popular,
Yeah.
and as a result, the Conservative Party, who were in power, they didn't want their voters who wanted to leave the EU to go and vote for UKIP. And so, because they saw that there was an appetite for this, what they said instead was, okay, well, to appease the people and keep them in our base, we will put forward a referendum, which is basically like a people's vote on whether we should leave the EU, and we voted to leave, and we've now left. I mean, there's still negotiations and stuff, but anyway, we don't need to get into that. But UKIP's a very famous example. Another example is the Animal Welfare Party. They have influenced legislation in the UK. I mean, they don't have any like MPs, which is like a member of parliament, so someone in the national parliament. They don't have any, but just because they are a small party, but they still have a bit of force, they've been able to influence some legislation.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a bit of sort of context as to how a party like this can be set up. It's relatively easy to set one up. The barriers I don't think are that high. So I think the group who set up this party, who I can mention a few names, but they presumably haven't interviewed any of them, but presumably it was a way to essentially increase the exposure of antinatalism. So a few of their policies. So the first one is a child tax credit. So basically, I don't know, because they made this manifesto in 2015, 2016, it might reference things that are no longer true.
Mm.
So they talk here about phasing out tax credits for family that have children. So apparently, if you have, or at least at the time, I don't know if this is still the case, that if you have a child, you get some sort of tax relief. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but they were proposing that be phased out. Another policy was the wealthy family tax, which is basically families that have a combined income of £60,000 or more will have an increased tax rate for each child they have until the child turns 18. So for anyone who doesn't really understand that, it basically means if a couple, if a couple have a combined income of £60,000 or more, let's say they both pay 20% tax on their income. If they have a child, it might go up to 23% tax or something. And from when the child's born to the child being 18, they pay 3% more tax. Then when they're 18, it would drop back down to 20. If they have two children, it'd go up to 6%. so on.
Interesting.
So that's how that would work. And then the other thing they had is old age care. So they basically wanted to create a quality elderly care and end of life system to take care of people. Um, Funded by reducing the demand on maternity wards, so the funding could then be shifted to elderly care, but also funded by the wealthy family tax that I mentioned before. And then they had a smattering of other policies that are not like well, okay, some of them are related to procreation, but anyway, so I just so they had policies on assisted dying, abortion, animal issues, drugs, and faith schools as well. So if you want to read those all in detail, the manifesto isn't long; it's only like 3 pages or something. There'll be a link in the description. Um, and yeah, from what I could find, I think that it was set up by a person who went online as self Immolator or Immolator. I'm not sure how to say that word. Um, so I'll link. They still have a channel up. Apparently, they haven't been active publicly. No one really knows. Apparently, sort of where they are at the moment. Um, but yeah, I will link their channel because they still have some videos up from there. And then also, apparently, I should I to be honest, I wanted to watch this interview before we did this, but I didn't get time because I've been busy at work. But they actually did an interview on a radio show as
Interesting.
a result of setting up the party, which I haven't listened to, but I'll leave a link in the description. But apparently that was done by Glynos, who is an antinatalist YouTuber who um, I will again mention later, so I won't say too much about him now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was maybe on Irish radio. Um, and I'm assuming it would have been on Northern Irish radio, given that it was a party in the UK. Just for anyone that doesn't understand that, Ireland is the island next to Britain, so like England, Wales, Scotland, and it's split in two. So the north part is called Northern Ireland, and that's part of the UK as a country, and then the rest of it is just called Ireland, and that's a separate country. Um, and then so yeah, that was basically everything I could find about the old antinatalist party. It it looked like it died off a while ago. Any sort of post about it, the most recent posts that I could see people talking about it were from like 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I think it was maybe it seems like it was a sort of flash in the pan sort of thing. um and then moving to the present day, so the only organization I could think of that deals in the political realm um, and discusses the matter of procreation is Population Matters. So Population Matters are I think they were founded in the UK, but I might be wrong with on that. But they operate in the UK anyway, and they are a campaign group that lobbies government, but they also do outreach to the general public as well. So they turn up to a lot of environmental marches and stuff. And so they basically they talk about reducing birth rates, but they talk about it from like an environmental overpopulation standpoint. Um, but and we'll get onto this later. There are antinatalists who have been involved with this organization, and when I mean like as in antinatalists, like proper antinatalists. Um, and yeah, so I'll get onto that later because I'm going to mention a specific person, but we'll get onto that later. But yeah, that was it. That was basically everything I could sort of find about political stuff. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I think you covered everything. I'm always in two minds about the either this government support for families in terms
Yeah,
of. I worry that some of the laws or some of the reforms, if they are changed, might harm the children, and it's not
yeah.
their fault.
No, I get
Their
you.
parents brought
Yeah,
them
yeah,
into existence. So I'm always in two minds about what the political policies we should follow are, and whether or not we might be punishing the kids. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I definitely think like government incentives, tax incentives around procreation are some of the more current kind of political issues on this
Yeah.
topic. Um, oh, one relevant for you, mate. Has antinatalism been discussed in the mainstream media before, on TV, in newspapers, etc.?
So, yeah, we'll get on to what you're referring to in a minute, but so I'm not going to go over like specific articles or anything. So antinatalism has been discussed in media articles in the UK on various occasions, and I will link a few examples in the description. But if you just type in, you know, Guardian antinatalism or BBC
Yeah,
antinatalism or any UK news outlet and then antinatalism, something will come up. So I think all of them at some point have talked about it.
definitely. I was going to say the
And
BBC stuff's actually pretty fair. I remember Benatar was interviewed for like a half-hour kind of radio episode about having kids, and it was mostly around environmentalism. But
I really I don't
it's on there.
if you can find that, can you send me a link? Because I didn't
Yeah,
come across
definitely.
that, so I'll try and include that as well.
And it was quite
Um,
fair actually. I was pleasantly
yeah.
surprised when
Oh no, that's decent.
he appeared.
Um, And then another thing is as well is more sort of like alternative modern media, however you want to refer to it. Um, you know, like media outlets that sort of mainly operate on YouTube and stuff like that. I've seen a few stories pop up from them. Often it's conservative media outlets who are sort of, you know, oh, that, you know, they're going to try and stop us having our kids or whatever. Um, you know, it's part of the sort of global conspiracy or something.
Yeah,
So
going to make us all soy boys, and then
yeah, yeah,
then we're not going to be able to have kids because of the soy.
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
new
exactly.
conspiracy I've just invented, but
I
yeah, probably going to
mean,
appear
you've
on
just
GB
invented
News
it.
tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. You've just invented it, but some asshole online's going to fucking run with it.
Exactly.
Um, uh, yeah. So I won't go into any specific articles because, you know, there's a few of them and people can find them and read them, and we'll link a few in the bottom, and I'll link that thing that the radio episode that you just mentioned as well. Another thing which is quite interesting, which maybe some people will know about, but I'm not sure how widely known about it is because it's not really active now, but it was quite active in the past. Is the Species Barrier radio show.
Yeah,
So for people that don't know, um, I mean, in every country you have like local radio, right? So you have like a radio channel which only can be picked up in a certain geographical like area. And the Species Barrier radio show, I think it was like that, and it was in an area in the UK surrounding the city of Lincoln. So there's a city in the UK called Lincoln, and the Species Barrier Radio Show went out. I don't know if it was weekly or monthly. I'm not sure, but it went out like regularly. Uh, on the radio waves in that part of the country, and it was run by two vegan antinatalists, um, and they covered, you know, many different topics. Of I will link their archive in the description so you can listen to. I don't know if it's all of the episodes they ever aired or only some were recorded and the ones that were recorded put on. I'm not sure about that, but I will link their archive so you can go through and listen to them in the description. But they did multiple episodes that related to the topic of reproduction, and they had one episode that was specifically on antinatalism, and that episode featured David Benatar, who obviously I don't really need to introduce, and also Maestro. I'm not sure how you say it. He's a Norwegian antinatalist rapper. He's also vegan as well. Um, so yeah, they but some other episodes they did that are related to procreation. So they did one called Billboards and Breeding. They did one called Growth Bustards and Exponential Function. They did one called Karen Schrag on overpopulation. They did another one called Earth Mother, which I believe Earth Mother was a documentary or a book. And they did one on Vasectomist, which Vasectomist I think was a documentary that came out. I think that's what it's referring to. Yeah, and you can go back and I've not gone back and listened to all of the episodes, but I've listened to I'm not sure how many now, like a decent amount. And yeah, I enjoy listening to the old sort of. It's quite like how like a lot of stuff now, because technology has progressed so much, a lot of the stuff you listen to is quite sort of like it's I don't know how to put it, like quite well no, because it is well put together, but it's quite like tight and modern, and everything is sort of
Polished.
slick and stuff.
Yeah,
You what?
it's quite polished and
Yeah, polished is the right word. Yeah, polished. um but listening to the Species Barrier, it's still well put together. Like, I enjoy how they've put it together. They mix in interviews, them speaking with some music as well. Um and but it's still got a bit of sort of like a retro sort of
yeah.
local grassroots feel to it, so it's quite nice.
Definitely, from what I've
um
listened, I really like the when they include music, because it really does
yeah,
sound like classic radio that you
yeah, it's like
have
classic
to
British
tune in,
radio.
rather than like podcasts on Spotify and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd recommend people to go back and listen to that. I mean, not all of the episodes are about antinatalism. You can specifically listen to those, but the two hosts are both antinatalist. So it's just nice to listen to something knowing that the people doing the show are also antinatalist. But hearing their thoughts on other topics as well. Um, Another thing is, there was a book. Now, I don't know much about this book, so I'm actually just going to read something off of the internet for people. So there was a book released, I believe, by two British. I believe they were both British antinatalists. I'm not really aware of who the people are. I didn't have time to do like proper research on them, but so I don't really know what like types of antinatalists they are. But yeah, so it's a book called the Offset. And I'm just gonna quickly read like a blurb or whatever
Is it like a
for it.
non-fiction book or a novel,
Yeah, it's non-fiction.
like an academic book?
No, it's fiction. It's fiction.
Sorry, it's a fiction book. Sorry,
It's a fiction. Yeah, what did I say?
I thought it said non-fiction, but that may have been my B12 deficiency affecting my brain performance.
Okay. Actually, I think it was just by one person, maybe. Um, Apologies. Someone listening to this is going to know more about it than me, and they're going to be like, "Who the fuck is this bellend doing this episode?"
Mate, they think
Anyway,
that in
so
every episode anyway.
yeah, exactly. They think it anyway. um, cool. So let me read this out. So it's your 18th birthday and one of your parents must die. You are the one who decides who do you pick. In a dying world, the offset ceremony has been introduced to counteract and discourage procreation. It is a rule that is simultaneously accepted, celebrated, and abhorred. But in this world, survival demands sacrifice. For every birth, there must be a death. Professor Jack Boltanski is leading Project Salix, a groundbreaking new mission to save the world by replanting radioactive Greenland with genetically modified willow trees. But things aren't working out, and there are discrepancies in the data. Has someone intervened to sabotage her life's work? In the meantime, her daughter Miri, an antinatalist, has run away from home days before their offset ceremony, where one of her mothers must be sentenced to death. She is brought back against her will following a run in with the law. Which parent will Miri pick to die? The one she loves or the one she hates who is working to save the world?
Interesting.
So that's quite interesting. In the blurb, it specifically says one of the characters is an antinatalist. So yeah, that's quite interesting. I don't know. I will link obviously the book in the description. Um but the author is called Calder I'm not sure how to say their second name. It's not an English second name, so I'm assuming they grew up in the UK rather than they're sort of ethnically from here. But yeah, actually, let me just do some on the on the episode research, like literally while we're doing, because I just want to check actually if this person is like at all linked to the UK. So I'm not really sure. Okay, all right. Well, let's just say that they're from the UK. Fuck it. They're
Sounds
an
good.
honorary. They're an honorary citizen. Fuck it. Okay. Cool. Anyway, swiftly moving on.
Well, we've
Nothing
actually
but
missed one
professionalism.
mainstream media conversation.
No. I was just gonna get to that.
A very
So
nice young lady who selflessly was the youngest surrogate mother. And there she was with some angry young man berating her on Channel 4.
exactly. Yeah. Only wholesome vibes. Um. So no, what John's referring to is I mean, it must have been what, like 2-3 years ago now or something. I can't. No, 2 years ago, because in fact it was 2 years ago, pretty much like to the day. Basically, it was around this time 2 years ago. Um, and yeah, so basically, I was in a so there's a media outlet in the UK called Channel 4, which is like one of the sort of main news slash media outlets in the UK. It's very well respected, um, uh, and yeah, they both do like traditional sort of media, but they also do they've adapted to have YouTube and stuff like that, and they do an online series, or did one, called Would You Rather, where they get two people together who have opposite opinions or differing opinions on a subject which is either controversial or socially relevant or just interesting or whatever, and they get them to have a conversation for about 2 hours and then cut it down to 5 minutes. um, and I was in one of those on Would You Rather Have Kids or Not, and it was with, like John said, this woman who at the time was the youngest surrogate mother in the UK. um, and yeah, it was interesting. I will leave a link to the video, and I also do a video reacting to it as well, sharing my thoughts, like like a year later or whatever. So I won't rehearse everything here, but yeah, I actually I didn't think it would do that well, to be honest, but it's actually one of their best performing ones.
Yeah,
I think in total it got around 6 or 7 million views.
yeah, all over Facebook. I think there's
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
Facebook
it was.
video shorts can get millions of views, and that one did really well.
Yeah. Yeah. It did. It went all over uh Facebook, and they were doing like paid promotions of it on YouTube as well. So like when you watch YouTube, there will be like a paid like like that people can pay for a video to pop up and be recommended, and that one would pop up for people.
Yeah.
Um and yeah, like a lot, I actually thought I'd be able to fly under the radar, but a lot of my like personal friends and stuff saw it, which was led to some situations, but anyway.
I thought, what
um
it's worth, mate, I thought you came across really well. It was quite clear
I
that
thought
they had,
I thought I came across like a bell end.
but they clearly had cut it. So
Yeah.
there's one part where she was talking about being a surrogate mother, and then it just cuts to you going, "What you've done is something horrible."
Yeah,
Something
like
like
you're
that.
an awful
Yeah,
person. Yeah.
she
They
seemed really
completely.
nice. How did
She
you
was.
get like on the show? Like, did they approach you? Did you
Yeah,
apply?
well, so very quickly. So basically, I got a message from an anonymous antinatalist account on Instagram. There's someone who runs an account on Instagram about antinatalism, which I don't think it's very big. I can't actually remember which one it is now, but they messaged me and said, "Hey, I've just been contacted by this group who's looking for a young person in London to." Uh, appear in a video about having kids. And they reached out to me, but I don't like going on camera, and I'm not sure if they were in the UK anyway, because they're just like some random Instagram account. And so they said, do you mind if I like send them your way? And I was like, yeah, cool. And then they contacted me and just went from there. I had to do an interview, and like answer some questions, because they wanted to check if I was like, had the right temperament for it and
Yeah.
stuff. And yeah, and then I got on it. And the woman you were saying, she seems like she's a nice woman. Like, she was. We got on like very well off camera, and on camera as well. But when we were on camera, it was kind of like we were on the subject and
Yeah.
following the
Of course.
sort of prompts they were giving us and stuff. But yeah, like off camera got on like very well. But the way they edit it, they do the music, they do the cuts, they do the whatever, and it makes it look more hostile than it
Yes.
was.
They're just cutting
Um,
back and zooming on her reactions to you going,
yeah,
"What you've
exactly. Yeah,
done
yeah,
is
yeah,
something terrible." It just
yeah,
zooms in on her looking
yeah.
shocked
But
and offended
yeah, it'll zoom in on a reaction
to
that's for
something
something
else.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they've edited it to make it look like she's reacting to that or whatever. But yeah, so that was an interesting experience, and that was like the first time that I'd like properly been on camera, and stuff. So, well, not the first time I'd been on camera, but the first time I'd like properly been on camera about
Yeah.
antinatalism and stuff. So it was an experience.
And the comments were really positive. The comments were very
Yeah, that
supportive.
was one thing I was surprised by, is the comments. They were actually a lot more sympathetic to to my side than I thought. And there were even some parents in the comments saying like, "Look, I've had kids, and I actually agree with the guy." So um, yeah, I mean, those could have been antinatalists just saying that to make it look better. I don't know, but
True. There are a lot of
I'll
comments
take it.
going, I agree with his logic, but he is a bit of a douchebag. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I
again,
had
not all
multiple
good.
people like telling me to kill myself and all of this sort of stuff. Classic.
I was
Haha.
only joking about that comment, but I imagine you probably
Yeah.
did get people saying, "Yeah, why don't you just kill yourself if life's so
Yeah,
awful?"
yeah, 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 yeah.
And something that we've touched all the way through. Who are some of the figures in UK antinatalism?
So this was really interesting. This was the second question that I really enjoyed researching. Now, I'm not going to be able to give every one of these people the justice that they deserve, but I think I've got a decent collection of people here. And yeah, I'm going to go through them, and they cover a range of different things. So some of them are musicians, some of them are YouTubers, some of them are, just people who have done specific projects, some of them are celebrities, like, well, one of them is a celebrity. Um, and yeah, so I'll go through them. Um, no particular order. So I think some of the people who I will mention will see this video. No particular order. Don't get offended. And also, if I've left anyone out, it is not for any reason. It's just um, either like I was not aware of you, or if I am aware of you, I just literally forgot and I'm scum. So just message me and call me a bellend and have done with it. Um, Cool. So, first person I wanted to mention is AK Hunter. So, for anyone that doesn't know, AK Hunter is a musician, I believe, from the north of the UK in a city called Manchester. And AK Hunter is a antinatalist musician, and I believe his most recent album was called No Child Left Behind, which has multiple antinatalist songs on it. Um, and I really like a lot of I haven't listened to all of his work, but the work I've listened to, I've really liked it. Like, he's very skilled. Um, uh yeah, so I'll leave a link in the description for like that specific album, and then if you like his stuff, you can find it, you can do a rabbit hole and find out more of his stuff. um The second, staying on the theme of musicians, the second musician that I wanted to mention, who I don't know that much about, I actually only found out about him through researching for this episode, is a musician called Creep. Now, Creep, I believe, is no longer with us. So they're not around anymore, or he isn't around anymore. Um, but he was an antinatalist rapper from the UK. And I watched some of his stuff, and it's very like in your face rap. It's I think it would say it's gothic as well. It's quite dark rap, which you would maybe expect from an antinatalist, but not all antinatalist musicians or rappers are dark. Um, but yeah, I'll leave a link in the description to one of Creep's songs, and then from there you can find more. But yeah, seems like an interesting person. I'm sad I didn't get to sort of cross paths with them, but yeah. Um, there are people in the community that know more about Creep and actually knew Creep when he was still around, but yeah, I never got to interact with him. Don't really know much about him. I've just seen a bit of his work that is still available on YouTube and other places. So yeah, it's quite interesting, how there are people and parts of antinatalism, specifically in the UK, that sort of go in and out of, presence. And it's just interesting, like when I was researching for this, digging up things that I wasn't even aware of. Like through doing this, I learned that I'm so ignorant about antinatalism, even in the country that I was born and raised in, you know,
Same here.
and live in currently. Yeah, yeah.
When I do a bit of digging,
So
there's a lot out there that I've not come
yeah, so it's really interesting how, it's almost like there's this sort of like somewhat underground sort of grassroots, like specifically antinatalist music scene in the UK. Um, but yeah, so that was interesting. So, definitely go and check out some of Creep stuff. The third musician that I wanted to mention is the one celebrity that I'm including. So that is Morrissey. So for anyone that doesn't know who he is, so he originally became known for being the frontman of the Smiths. So the Smiths are very famous British band, again from Manchester. Manchester is, it's got a really good music scene. It's put out a lot of famous artists. In fact, like Joy Division, you know. So yeah, so Morrissey originally was the frontman for the Smiths. The Smiths were very influential, very famous. A lot of music artists, famous ones and just general musicians will cite the Smiths as sort of like, an influence on them and stuff. And the Smiths were only around for a short time. They then broke up. Morrissey went on and did a solo career, which he's still doing. And he is a vegan and famous animal rights supporter. He wrote the song Meat is Murder, which is a very famous animal rights anthem. But I also strongly suspect, and I've done a video on this, which I'll link in the description, that he's anti-natalist as well. I mean, he has done a song called I'm the End of the Family Line. He's done a song called Life is a Pigsty. He's done another song called Neil Cassidy Drops Dead, which I believe has an anti-natalist message in it. But I've never seen him explicitly use the term or anything like that. But I'm pretty sure he's referred to procreation as an unthinkable act, I think it was, or something like that. So I'm pretty convinced he is one, which wouldn't be out of character because he's quite well known for having a sort of pessimistic take on life and holding relatively controversial views, um, and being open about them. So I'm pretty sure he is an antinatalist, but he probably just doesn't know the word, so he doesn't have anything to latch onto or something. But yeah, so I thought I'd mention him. Actually, if we're gonna chuck in celebrities, maybe you could squeeze out Ricky Gervais.
Yeah, I was
I
thinking he
mean,
would be the celebrity.
yeah, no. So the reason I didn't include Ricky is because I'm not as confident with him. He has said I think if you sat Ricky Gervais down and talked to him about it, I think he'd be pretty much on board, if not fully sign up straight away. But I think he's sort of like 80-90% of the way there. And he said he hasn't said specifically anti-natalist things, but he's taken the piss out of things that natalists say to anti-natalists.
Definitely, yeah.
So yeah, honorary mention to Ricky Gervais, and I don't think I need to explain who he is. Everyone knows who Ricky Gervais is. But he's from Reading in England. Next person is repping it for Wales. So this is Wales's one mention. So that's Glynos. So I mentioned him before. He was the one that did the interview for the Irish radio show for the Antinatalist party. So he is an antinatalist YouTuber. He is not as active anymore. Hopefully he will be in the future, but he used to be quite active, producing content online. And he made quite well-known series called The Road to Antinatalism and Adventures of an Antinatalist, which are still on YouTube. You can watch them all. I've done a live stream reacting live to The Road to Antinatalism. To antinatalism. I'm going to do a live stream at some point watching Adventures of an Antinatalist, but it's for another time.
The Adventures
But
one I found so relatable. Like,
oh, have you watched them?
I have. I'd only been
Oh, nice.
antinatalist for a few months, and already, basically, it just follows Glynos as himself, like a cartoon drawing of himself,
Yeah.
just going through like day-to-day interactions. So, like the one where, like, his work colleague announces that she's pregnant, and everyone cheers, and he's being told by everyone that he has to congratulate her, and he's like, "Oh, do I have to?" And that kind of thing. They're so relatable. I'm very, very
Yeah,
funny.
yeah. Yeah, I know, that's good. I haven't seen any of them. I've sort of like intentionally not watched them because I want to watch them for the first time, like
Yeah.
on a live
Amazing.
stream. And
You'll enjoy them.
but
Enjoy them.
yeah, yeah. No, that's good. That's good. So yeah, I will link those so anyone can find those. But that's Glynos. And actually, we should have said this at the start. So for anyone that doesn't know, the UK is split up into four. I don't know. I think technically they're four countries. I'm not. The UK is a bit weird. I don't really know how the political system
Yes.
fully fits together, but four separate countries. So you got England, Scotland, Wales, and then on a separate island is Northern Ireland. So those four kingdoms, I guess, are united in the United Kingdom. So
So I think technically it's like there are four different countries, and then the UK is the sovereign state.
yeah,
Those who are interested, and right now
yeah.
everyone's twitching off or falling asleep. With
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's just like, yeah. So anyway, so Glynos is repping it for Wales. Next, we have another YouTuber called Derived Energy. So Derived Energy is also no longer with us. So I actually learned about Derived Energy's story through Amanda when I did a conversation with her about the early days of online antinatalism, which was really interesting. But it was sad to hear Derived Energy's story. I won't go through it all now, but he basically ended up in jail for a completely unjust reason, and then he died in jail somehow. Um, I think it's somewhat unclear how he died, but he ended up dying in jail. But before he was put in jail, he created he was an anti-natalist YouTuber, created content online. And when I was speaking to Amanda, she said that he sort of played a very important and sort of pivotal role in early online antinatalism, helping sort of he was one of the nodes around which the community coalesced, um, apparently. So again, I never, had any personal interaction with him. I came into the community too late. I've honestly not really gone back and watched any of his videos. Maybe I've seen a few and not known they were his, but yeah, apparently he was a very important figure in antinatalism before, but he yeah, he was from the UK. Um, the next person, another YouTuber, is George Martin. So George is mainly known for doing like animal rights stuff and vegan work. So he runs Carnism Debunked, which is a website, social media channels, and a YouTube channel. And he's the brain behind that. And like I was saying, he spends all of his time on animal rights, but he is an antinatalist, and he's been on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. I've had him on for a discussion. But yeah, I'm not sure. In the future, he may talk more about it on his platforms, but I think he's fairly sort of grounded and solid on animal rights stuff, which I think is completely fair enough. You know, it's a very important issue that needs people working on it. So he's doing good work. Um, but yeah, I thought he was worth mentioning because even though his YouTube channel isn't antinatalist, he's still an antinatalist figure in the UK, and people know, you know, well, some people know that he's antinatalist, and yeah, I thought it was worth mentioning him as well. So now I want to move on to, so we've done musicians, YouTubers. We're going to get to academics later, but I want to mention, I've got the names of 3 people that I want to mention who are British people, British antinatalists who have done specific things, specific projects, or you know, things that they do that have brought them some notoriety, or it is something that I think should bring them notoriety, and so which is why I'm mentioning them. So the first one is Danny Shine, who we've mentioned before. So we mentioned Danny before about how he goes to Speaker's Corner and talks to people. But so Danny, a bit of background on Danny. So he, I believe, um, well, obviously he became Danny Shine, you know, when he was born. But he became the Danny Shine that we all know and love when he started going out on the streets of London and doing what he refers to as street performance or street art or street activism, where he basically goes around and tries to get people to question the assumptions that they make, the assumptions that are culturally fed into them since they're a child. So he started out by doing that on the sort of level of consumerism, questioning the sort of consumerist mindset and consumerist culture that people have, trying to get them to not just mindlessly go around and consume and conform to social sort of norms. He then became vegan, started talking about animal rights, um, and he then became antinatalist as well, and he's spoken about that as well. And essentially, what he does is he goes around London with a megaphone, and essentially just stands in the street and interacts with. He's very interactive, back and forth with people in the street, um, and there's so much video footage of him online, hours and hours and like when I was thinking like, oh, I'll link a couple of like videos of Danny doing stuff in the street so people can get a flavor, and then I realized like, which one shall I link? Like there's literally there's so many, so I'll link a few in the description. But yeah, Danny is quite well known, I think, just generally in London. He apparently, I'll try and find a link to this, but apparently, you know how when you go to somewhere as a tourist, you can get like a visitor's book and it tells you attractions to see. Apparently, there was a visitor's book once where he was listed as an attraction. So it was like, if you go around London, you know, look out for Danny Shine and his megaphone. So I'll try and find that and link it in the description for people to have a look at. But yeah, Danny is also well known for going to Speaker's Corner and talking about antinatalism there. And yeah, um, I'll link some videos of that in the description. One of the things he's been doing recently is going around London with his megaphone and asking people like, why were they born, and literally getting them to call up their parents and ask, you know, and he offers people £100 if they can give him a good reason, and obviously no one ever can.
Yeah,
So
it's really
yeah,
interesting. I was going to
Yeah,
say
yeah,
my
yeah.
favourite Danny Shine moment, because it ties into what we were saying earlier with Speaker's Corner,
Mm,
is there was a really heated religious debate and it was getting really aggressive and both sides were shouting each other down. And again,
yeah,
Speaker's Corner is supposed to be kind of like fun and everyone's being expressive or whatever, but I really don't like it when people are getting aggressive and there were these two
yeah.
groups getting aggressive with each other, arguing about whose religion was right and this kind of thing. And then you just hear over the top, please do not procreate. Danny shouting through his megaphone. And I thought, please, I hope they're all listening because I really don't want this group of aggressive religious zealots to have kids. And I
Yeah,
thought it was
yeah.
just fantastic. He was the
Yeah, yeah,
first
so funny.
antinatalist that I ever spoke to. I got shouted
Oh,
at through a
really?
megaphone at a vegan event. Um, yeah, and I reflected on it and thought, this guy's absolutely spot on. This guy's
Yeah,
correct
yeah, yeah.
with what he's saying.
Yeah, yeah, no, and he's great to speak to as well. I'm hoping to do a live stream soon, reacting to some of his videos, and then hopefully getting him on for a bit of a chat as well, as part of that. But yeah, so that's Danny Shine. So the next person I wanted to mention, who I actually was not aware of before researching for this, but actually I kind of want to get him on to do an interview with him because I think his story is going to be really interesting. But there is a British travel writer in the UK who is a vegan and an antinatalist called Terry Grigg. And Terry travels around the world and writes books about his travels. Um, but he he actually his antinatalism, I don't know if it came from, but it's informed by the things that he's seen whilst traveling.
Yeah,
Because he's traveled to a lot of the parts of the world where suffering is much more viscerally observed. You can see it in, the squalor that some people live in, and, you know, in places that maybe don't have the medical care available to them that we are lucky to have in the UK.
yeah,
Um, so I thought that was really interesting. And he's done an interview actually on the Species Barrier radio show, which we mentioned before. So he's done an interview on one of their episodes. Um, but yeah, I think Terry would be a really interesting person to speak to. He's, by the sounds of it, like an old school animal rights activist as well, an environmental activist. So I think he'd be someone with a lot of stories to talk to, and it's interesting that he'd have an antinatalist perspective on all of it as well. So I'm hoping to get him on. I think that would be really interesting. Um, the next and I'll link a few of his books in the description as well. The next person, talking of the Species Barrier radio show, is Marcus. So I'm actually not going to say Marcus's second name, just in case he doesn't want me to. But Marcus is one of the co-hosts for the Species Barrier radio show, or is/was. I'm not really sure if the Species Barrier radio show is something that's going to continue or be revived, but he was/is one of the one of the co-hosts of the Species Barrier radio show. So if you listen to any of those episodes, there's a man and a woman hosting it. He's the man. And he's I speak to him sometimes, and he was telling me a while ago about some talks he gave. He used to give talks for Population Matters, the organization we mentioned before. You remember that I said there were actually some proper antinatalists in there. So he used to go to vegan and environmental festivals, events, and he would, do talks at those, and he would do talks with the group Population Matters, but he would try to put that antinatalist flavor of message in there rather than just environmental and overpopulation. He would try to get that sort of antinatalist flavor in there, which is interesting. I've never been to any of his. I don't know if he ever gives the talks anymore, or if this was something he used to do. But yeah, I never saw any of them. But yeah, I will see if there are any publicly available, and if there are, I'll link one or two of the talks that he's given in the description. Um, so moving on to academics. So the first, okay, so I'm going to hold my hands up straight away. Some of these academics, I should know more about them, but I don't. So I'm just going to like fleetingly mention them. So let me actually mention the three that I don't really know much about, and then I'm going to finish on the one that I know most about. So the three I don't really know about are, so there's Thaddeus Metz, who I believe is German or Austrian, um, but is based in the UK at a university in the UK, and has written a book on contemporary antinatalism. So I will link that in the description. But that sounds quite interesting. I haven't read it. The next person I was going to mention is Christopher Belshaw. So um, Christopher Belshaw released a paper in 2012 called "A New Argument for Antinatalism." I don't know if Christopher has done more work around antinatalism. Again, I'm really showing my ignorance here. Some people are going to be like, "Who the fuck are you?" Like Christopher Belshaw is. I'm sure he's done loads of stuff, but people are going to be like, "You don't know that he's done like all this stuff, and you're just mentioning this one paper." I apologize. Um, and the third person that I was going to quickly mention was Gerald Harrison, who released a paper with Julia Tanner in 2011 called Better Not to Have Children. Again, I have actually read that one, but it was ages ago, so I can't really remember what's in it. Again, I will link all of these in the description, and if people are interested, they can read through those, but I'm sorry, I just don't know more about those people. The one academic I do know a bit more about is David Pearce. Now, David Pearce, I would probably say out of the academics is probably the most famous. Um, and but he's interesting, and actually, I'm not sure when I'm going to put this video out, but tomorrow I'm doing a live stream reacting to one of his videos, and I've had a short exchange with him on Twitter as well. But um, so David Pearce is an antinatalist. He is a signed up antinatalist himself, but he is of the opinion that he doesn't think. He, what David is looking at is he's looking at, okay, so I'm an antinatalist, but what I want to do, the reason I'm antinatalist is because I don't want to do bad things and I want to make the world a better place, right? And he's looking at the world and he's thinking, right, well, what is going to make the world the best place? And even though he is an antinatalist, he's not convinced antinatalism is the best tool to use to make the world a better place. And so what he focuses on is this thing called transhumanism. So he wrote a very famous I'm not sure if you'd refer to it as an essay or a book, but he wrote a very famous piece called The Hedonistic Imperative. Um, and he has set up a group which was called something else, which I can't remember, but it's now called Humanity Plus, which to me sounds a bit dystopian, but whatever. But basically, what he what he aims to do is contribute to the effort to making lives much better rather than focus his time on preventing people from coming into existence. And his general rationale is that he doesn't really think that antinatalism is going to really catch on. He doesn't think that we're going to be able to prevent people um, from procreating. And so, what we might as well do is focus on making the lives of the people who will come into existence as good as possible.
And
And that's what
sorry, Lawrence,
transhumanism is. But yeah.
just a button. Sorry, when you say prevent people from procreating, you mean convince people?
Yeah, convince. Yeah,
Yes,
convince. Yeah,
rather
yeah,
than
yeah.
like forcefully stopping them.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah. Convince. So it's basically like a plan B, basically for antinatalism. So that's what he works on. But he's open that he is an antinatalist himself. He does think it's wrong to bring sentient beings into existence. He just is like, well, people are gonna do that. So let's fucking run with it and try and do the best we can do. Um, so yeah, I'll link some of his stuff below. But yeah, David, very interesting person.
Definitely.
And I hope to at some point get him on and speak to him one to one and explore some of this stuff and. But yeah, interesting guy. that's all that's all the specific individuals that I had to go through. I don't know if you can think of anyone else off the top of your head that I've missed, but I'm pretty sure I've covered like
I mean,
anyone I could think of.
yeah, you've definitely
But
covered everyone that I was thinking of on this topic, for sure.
yeah, yeah. Um,
Next question.
so yeah, go for it.
So I'm not actually going to be able to answer this one because I
Yeah,
haven't been sterilised.
because you're not a true
I'm
believer.
not a true believer. I need to put my money where my mouth is.
Yeah, or
Um,
where your money where your balls are.
you shouldn't make those assumptions. Um, but what's it like getting sterilised in the UK?
Well, so I just said put your money where your balls are, but it's actually free in the UK. So, well, the first thing I'm going to say is I can actually only speak for vasectomies. I don't know about other forms of sterilization, and um, I should have researched this beforehand. But again, like I said, I've been busy at work and excuses. But yeah, so I'm going to be speaking about vasectomies basically, but I would imagine you can also get a tubal ligation free on the NHS. I'm not going to promise that, but I would imagine if vasectomies are free, tubal ligations will be as well.
You'd
It would
hope so.
probably be it would probably be a bit harder to get them though, just because generally people are more controlling of female reproductive systems
Yeah.
than they are male. Um, but anyway, so the basics. So in the UK, we have a free at the point of use healthcare system. So what that means is everyone pays taxes. Those taxes fund a health system that the government funds, and everyone gets to use that health system. Freely at the point of use. So if you get picked up in an ambulance, or you go to accident and emergency, or you book an appointment, that is all free, but we pay it with our taxes.
Yeah.
So vasectomies are free on the anyone. Well, not anyone. I mean, obviously you have to have like a male reproductive system, but like anyone can book an appointment, and yeah, and get it done. And it's, to be honest, it's very easy. I mean, I was 23 when I got mine. Like, I didn't really have much resistance. It's going to vary depending on the part of the country you're in, and what doctors you happen to interact with. But like my personal experience, very smooth from when I started the process to when I got it. It was about a month. It was free. My recovery was easy. I had everything I needed. There was a good support system. There was follow up care. So no issues. It's very accessible. It's free. Um, yeah, so that is the state of getting sterilized in the UK, at least for a man, anyway.
It's really
Yeah,
positive.
not really sure I got much else to say. It's just it's a very inoffensive process, that is probably the easiest in the world. I would be surprised if there was a country where it was easier, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Advice for UK antinatalists? Other than, of course, put your money where your mouth is and do get the stick.
Yeah. So you actually put this question in. So what do you mean by advice? Advice for what?
Well, I just think in general, if somebody was new to the topic of antinatalism, or what often I find is that people have had these ideas for a long time,
Yeah.
and they want to do something about it, whether that's meet other people or get involved, that kind of thing. Yeah, where would you advise them to look in terms of getting involved, whether that's with activism or just meeting other like-minded people?
I would say, well, I think if we're just going specifically, because there's some advice I would give to any antinatalist, but specifically going to UK antinatalists, I would say just join one of the big Facebook groups.
Yeah,
Either there's one of the biggest English speaking Facebook groups is just called Antinatalism. I'll link these in the description, but I would just join that. Or there's another one called Antinatalist Vegans. Join either of those. post in there. Because I'm in both of those groups, I know people who are in both of those groups. There's quite a few UK based people in both of those groups. I would just go post in one of those saying you're in the UK, and people will find you, and you will just get connected with antinatalists in the UK. I mean, we do, I know I so the most recent episode, the episode before this, was about German antinatalism, and it looks like they have a more connected, or are building a more connected community. We don't really have like a formally connected, which is surprising given everything we've said before
Yeah.
in this episode. We don't actually have like a formally connected community. Like, it's just, well, there's not even like a UK group, to be honest. We
No,
have
not that
like
I've seen. No.
yeah, we have a small group for London, which we use to meet up sometimes, but there's not a UK one. So if anyone wants to set that up, then definitely go for it. But I'm not going to take that burden on because I got too much on already. But yeah, that's the only thing I would do, really. Just post in some of the main
Yeah.
like English speaking groups, and you will get connected with people. You know, there's the antinatalists in the UK, very, principled, very decent people. So you'll
Speak for
find
yourself,
friends
mate.
and
I don't know if you qualify.
okay, well, we've got one cunt, and he's the one that's joined me. um, but yeah, I mean, obviously it would depend what part of the country you're in.
Yeah.
But if you are in any of the larger cities, there will be people that you can connect with,
Yeah.
guaranteed. In any of the larger or middle cities, you will have people you can connect with. In
Yeah.
fact, I can personally think of people in most of the big cities. So yeah.
Definitely. And if you are struggling to find people who are specifically within those antinatalist groups, because we do have like a culture of animal activism in the UK, or at
Oh
least it's
yeah.
fairly widespread, and environmental activism as well, you could always try and join those groups and meet like minded people. Again,
Mhm.
like people will broadly be open to talking about it in those kind of settings. So,
Yeah.
my advice would just be like, it definitely can be lonely being an antinatalist, but I do think we should recognise that we are very fortunate in the UK compared to
Yeah.
other places. I think your interviews, Lawrence, of antinatalism around the world have shown that we are quite fortunate. So,
Yeah.
yeah, take advantage of the opportunities that are out there, and if there aren't opportunities, if you would like to see some sort of some more movement building or different groups, etc. Yeah, take the plunge. Really, feel free to set one up and see how it goes.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, this kind of leads on to the next and like final question we got, right, about UK antinatalists finding community and doing activism. So, um, in terms of finding community, so the only additional thing I would add to what we've both said already is that there is a festival each year in the UK called Vegan Camp Out. Obviously, it's not an antinatalist event, but I guarantee you there will be a large amount of
Yes,
antinatalists at this festival. So
at
if
least
you want
two
to,
because we're both going.
yeah, at least two, because we're both going. And I already know other like George Martin is going.
Yeah,
He's an antinatalist. I know other personal friends who are going, and they're antinatalists. So there will be a large amount of antinatalists, probably from all around the world, going to this event. It's a vegan event, but there will be lots of vegans there that are antinatalist. So if you want to meet other antinatalists, then come to the vegan camp out. There's still tickets left. I am going to be organizing like a unofficial sort of antinatalist meetup there where we can just hang out for a couple of hours or whatever in a specific part of the festival. I'll probably make like a little Facebook event and I'll share it around and stuff. But yeah, even if you're not in the UK, it's a really fun event anyway, and it's over a weekend. So if you can, just come to the UK and come and have a good time. Anyway, there's good food there. You'll meet loads of good people. Um, yeah, so if someone wants like a concrete thing, I mean, it's not happening until the end of July, so you got to wait a bit. But if someone wants like a concrete thing that they can turn up to, and then come to the vegan camp out. But that was the last thing I had to say about that.
great. Well, that's all my questions. Is there anything else you
All
want to
right.
add?
Sick. I think that's basically it, to be honest. I haven't got anything else to add. But I would just say, like, hopefully we've given people a decent overview of the UK. Again, I will have missed stuff out just because I don't know everything about antinatalism in the UK. I don't know all the people. I don't know all the projects that have gone on. There will probably be stuff that has happened in the past that has now died, and I just don't know about it because I wasn't there. But yeah, I think it's been an information dense episode, a bit like the German one was an information dense episode. I'm gonna put all the links to stuff that I can that I've mentioned in the description. So if you are in the UK and you want to learn more about antinatalism in this country, or if you're just anyone and you want to learn about any of the things we've mentioned, go into the description. All the links will be there. I'll clearly, you know, like label it and stuff so you know what's what. But I think that's basically it. Thank you for interviewing me, John.
No worries.
And yeah, I guess I'll see everyone in the next episode. And John will be back on the channel at some point soon, I'm sure.
Well, if I'm invited on, obviously Lawrence selective in terms of who he allows to grace his channel and
Yeah. Well,
enjoy his
I've
company.
well, I've got quotas on my channel, so you meet the bald quota.
Thank you. I mean, on behalf of all follically challenged people, I'm sure that I've been a good representative of all of us baldies.
Yeah. All right, sick. Well, yeah, cheers again, John, and I will see everyone else in the next episode.